What's up guys, this is Miasin. So the new Maxx is already traumatizing people left and right because it is absolutely disgusting. Essentially, it allows you to draw a card every time your opponent special summons from the deck and or extra deck. This is stupid. And also you can pair this up with another Mochami, so either another copy of itself or the Perillia. Practically impossible for your opponent to do anything without you generating an absurd amount of advantage. And when you combine this with the fact that you might have other handshots as well, it's gonna be just way too much pressure that you can apply on your opponent. But yeah, this card is quite clearly very broken, but that doesn't mean that it cannot be stopped or that there is no counterplay to it, because there are some strategies to beating Mochami Fuaros, whether it's in your deck building or even your technical play, and this is something that you really have to understand before your next event. Anyways, before we go any further, friendly reminder to smash the like and subscribe button. Of course, it really motivates me a lot to keep making videos like these. Let's try to get this video to 1,000 likes. And also a huge massive shout out to my sponsors, Inspire TCG as well as Dueling. They got you with some awesome deck boxes, playmats, and art cards, so please check them out and use the coupon code YASIN666 for 5% off. The links will be in the description box below. And with that being said, let's get right into it. Alright, so first things first, Mochami Fuaros is a card that you can ash, because obviously you're trying to draw cards with that, so just like Maxx and everything. So obviously that's a given, and also it loses the card by the grave, and cross out if you play your own Mochami Fuaros. So what you can do when you know for a fact that you're going to be going first post game 1, you side out 2 out of 3 Mochami Fuaros, so you keep 1, and then you got cross out. So as long as you don't draw the Fuaros, you should be able to hit it. So there are 7 counters in a potentially 40 card deck. Solid likelihood of being able to counter it. It's like in the 50-ish%. So you have a higher likelihood of countering Mochami Fuaros than the likelihood of your opponent even drawing Fuaros. You can also just accept the Fuaros and then just play defensively instead of trying to really full combo. So you can triple tactic thrust into floodgates. And there are a lot of really nasty floodgates that you can go into this format. So obviously Dimensional Barrier is probably your best friend against Tenpai Dragon, but also it overlaps for other decks. Otherwise, if Tenpai was the only deck that could lose to D-Bearer, people would probably choose to play Threatening Roar instead. As crazy as this may sound, I actually think Threatening Roar is a little better because it prevents their Chandra from special summoning a monster from the deck, and they just inflict less damage. And even under D-Bearer, they could theoretically kill you. It's just that it's not going to happen too often, and a lot of people are sacrificing the Link monsters from their extra deck in order to play more synchro monsters. But yeah, no, Dimensional Barrier is one heck of a card against a lot of decks as well. It's not just Tenpai Dragon, so even if you get D-Bear, even if you get 4 arrows by, let's say, Voice's Voice or Purely or whatever, I'm really just citing like random decks. D-Bear is going to be insane against them. There is also a different dimension ground against the combo decks, because this is basically what D-Bear is for those decks, but for combo decks, because they all really have to interact with the graveyard. So if you're banishing everything instead, this is going to be saving you for 1 turn. Unless you only have this and nothing else against the Snake Eye deck, they might maybe be able to do something, because they can still summon Snake Eye Ash and Pop, and then with the Temple, it boosts the attack by a lot. And if they have like other ways of summoning monsters, it might be a little annoying, especially if they have the Kashtira engine, because then they can summon like Fenrir, Unicorn, and then maybe even normal summon Diabellstar, the Black Witch, and then that can push for a lot of damage. But if you have like different dimension ground, like 1 defensive card, honestly, I think you should be fine. Some other cards that you can't necessarily thrust into, but are very good to physically hard draw, would be There Can Only Be One, Rivalry, Skill Drain. Some of the best cards, honestly, at defending yourself to 4 arrows, because the goal is to give your opponent pretty much 0 draws, but still apply so much pressure that you're still going to be winning at the end. So yeah, There Can Only Be One is very good against Yubel, very good against Tenpai Dragon, whereas Rivalry is very good against everything that utilizes There Can Only Be One, because obviously it's the exact opposite. So Rivalry against Snake Eye, very good. Rivalry against Fire King, solid. It's less good because they can out it by destroying it with Kirin. Sometimes it might require a little bit of setup, so if you can really catch them where Rivalry is good, then you're going to be in a very good position. And obviously Skill Drain is Skill Drain, it's broken against Tenpai, and it's just an overall really good card. Alright, so the last thrust target that you can go into, not necessarily the last, because you can also thrust into Featherstorm, but that's not really relevant unless you can get Swamp Mirror with the Silhouette Rabbit. I have made a video on that very recently, by the way, so go check it out. But Swamp Mirror is a continuous trap that can summon itself and pretty much mimic any type and attribute, so you can become Wind Wing Beast, and that will trigger your Featherstorm so that you can prevent your opponent from using any monster effect, which is completely unfair. But you can also thrust into Heavy Slum and pretty much just accept the Maxx challenge so that your opponent has a bunch of cards, but you don't care, because Heavy Slump, when your opponent has 8 or more cards in hand, they gotta shuffle their entire hand into the deck and draw 2 cards. Really punishes your opponent for drawing way too much. Great for you, because it allows you to still keep playing the game. And if your opponent has Board Breaker, counters, it's not gonna do anything. By the way, in case you were wondering, how does the ruling work with Heavy Slump if your opponent, let's say, has 8 cards in hand exactly, and then you activate Heavy Slump, and then your opponent, let's say, chains Cosmic Cyclone, and then the amount of cards goes from 8 to 7. Does your opponent still have to resolve the drawback of Heavy Slump of, you know, shuffling back everything and then drawing 2 cards? Or since your opponent no longer has 8 in hand, he doesn't have to do that? Well, so essentially, the fact that your opponent has to have 8 or more cards in hand is an activation requirement. So in other words, it doesn't have to be checked on resolution either. So if your opponent has 7 cards on resolution, as long as you're able to legally activate the card, it's just not gonna matter at all. Your opponent still has to shuffle back the entire hand and then draw 2 cards. So yeah, it hurts a lot. Your opponent will have to use like turn player priority to discard a bunch of cards in hand in case he has like 8 or 9 cards. But if he has like way too many, this is where it hurts so much. Unless again, he has like an Ash to negate it, because this is honestly like one of the only counters really. But yeah, this card can seriously hurt a lot. And yeah, just a one of, so if you're playing like a 60 card deck or something, you're not going to be drawing it too often. You can still thrust into it, which is really what matters. Another Molchemy, I guess, counter would be if you drill yourself, but I think that's kind of copium, because who's really trying to drill it's just a little weird. I guess you can still kind of do it, but then you're not going to be playing Yu-Gi-Oh yourself, so that's a little sus, but it's honestly not like the end of the world. You can still kind of do some cute things if you drill yourself, especially if you're playing, let's say, a deck like Yubel, that I think does not lose to drill if you know how to sequence your plays correctly. So even under drill, you can still do a lot of things. And if your opponent is not drawing cards, well, all the better for you, right? Okay, so 10 by Dragon is a deck that just absolutely does not lose to Molchemy 4-0s, because obviously you're going second. And that's my next point. If you're playing a going second deck, then you're safe from Molchemy 4-0s, because your opponent will make a board on turn 1 going first. And then 4-0s is going to be completely unutilizable against you, because you can only utilize this card if you control no cards. So obviously if you're playing a going second deck, you don't have to worry about that. And I want to say, even if that wasn't the case, 10 by Dragon still wouldn't care, because it's not a deck that really summons from the deck or extra deck too much. And when it does, it's just going to kill you anyway, so it really doesn't matter. And if it has to go first, it just makes Heretic Seal pass. So yeah, that's one draw. Ooh, who cares? Yeah, it really doesn't change too much to your life. So yeah, if you're playing a going second deck or a deck like Tenpai, Molchemy 4-0s is going to be your best friend. It's going to be really broken in your deck, but it's going to be very, very, very bad against you. Now, any runic-based strategy, honestly, really abuses like 4-0s, either as a discard fodder or, you know, as a card that just doesn't really beat you too much, because you're still playing like a trap deck in a way. Like the runic cards, I kind of consider them traps. They're all like hand traps, like hand. They're green traps. There you go. And by the way, speaking of traps, trap decks in general are very good at beating 4-0. So whether it's Eldritch or even Labyrinth, well, or rather the other way around, Labyrinth especially, and even Eldritch, because that deck is also kind of solid. Yeah, no, it really wipes the floor with the deck, and it really does not lose to 4-0s at all. Yeah, Voice is another deck that doesn't lose to 4-0s, because the maximum amount of draws that you can give to your opponent is 1 if you started with Diviner. Otherwise, you're really just giving 0 cards. It loses way harder to Pearlia than it loses to 4-0s, actually. Centurion is, yet again, another deck that doesn't lose to 4-0s. It doesn't summon anything from the deck whatsoever. It summons everything from the spell and trap zone and the hand, and it barely summons from the extra deck at all. Like, you're giving 1 draw to your opponent, maybe. That's it, that's all. Memento is an extremely good deck into 4-0s, but actually, ironically enough, it's worse into Pearlia, because you do summon a bunch from the hand, but from the extra deck, you really don't need to summon that much. You're going to be summoning your Creation King or your Twin Dragon, and you're going to be summoning your SP Lone Knight in order to beat Nibiru. So with one single Anguish, you can end your turn 1 on a huge board. You can end on SP, the boss monster, the trap card, and some nice setup in the graveyard and everything, and the Bone Party, by only giving 2 draws to your opponent. So your opponent only goes +1, and you still make like a semi-full combo, which is completely cracked. So yeah, I really recommend looking into Memento if you're sick and tired of Molchemy 4-0s, because this is one of the best, if not actually, it is the best combo deck into this card. Snake Eyes is not super great, but it does have some lines. Like one single Snake Eye Ash still gets you to Silhouette Rabbit into Azaroon and your Temple, or your follow-up with Original by giving only 1 shot to your opponent. And Deceptions, you're still going to be able to make the Rhea Silvara, so it's not like super insane, but at least you don't have to give your opponent multiple draws to make 1 interruption. Farking is a deck that can make several interruptions by really just giving like 1 or 2 draws to your opponent, so I really like that a lot, honestly. I think Farking is very underrated. Even if you like time your full arrows like perfectly, one single Volcanix is still making like 4, maybe even more interruptions super easily. So yeah, also something to keep in mind. And the Yubel deck, I think, is a little weaker than all those decks into 4 arrows, but Dark Beckoning Beast is the better card into 4 arrows, because you can still make a Yama, and then Surge the Sharvara, get the trap, and then make an Unseen Soul of Rage, which is like 4 disruptions. and you only really give like 2 to maximum 3 draws to your opponent. Yeah, okay, it is what it is, but still, it's, I want to say, not too bad. But yeah, all that just to show you guys and prove that there are some counterplays to Molchimi Pharos. It is not completely a lost cause, even though I do think that this is, it's an unfair card. It really is, and it is the best hand trap and the best card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Most likely at the current moment, just because a lot of decks can abuse it, a lot of decks do lose to it. And yeah, it's just a really unfair card when it resolves against you. You feel a little hopeless, but don't worry, my friend. As long as you deck build correctly, I think there's still some things that you can control. Anyways, that's all I had for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And let me know your thoughts on Molchimi Pharos and how you plan on countering it this format. And I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.